I should say from the beginning that I'm going to be talking this afternoon primarily to academics, supervisors, heads of departments, educational technology type people. So I'm going to be talking primarily to those people. And so all the masters and PhD students in the room, you may feel that I'm not talking to you as much, but I am hoping that you will learn something about using Turnitin for your own purposes. And I'm also hoping that I will give you the wherewithal to speak back to some of the problematic uses of Turnitin in our universities in South Africa and elsewhere. So, okay, that's just a reminder that we have something on every afternoon, Monday to Friday. The Centre for Postgraduate Studies has something on, WhatsApp groups and Zoom groups and so on. So if you aren't already familiar with our activities, you can just email our mailing list and ask to join, cpgs@lists.ru.ac.za. Right, moving on. So I should begin by saying that some of you may be offended by some of what I am going to say this afternoon, and I'm sorry about that. You may be offended because I find myself, this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, let's put it like that. It's a personal crusade. That's why I'm especially glad that Amanda Mplela is with us, because she's on this crusade with me. But in explaining this crusade, I am trying to get a bit hot around the collar, because I'm often called in to represent students who have been poorly treated thanks to some of these misunderstandings. And that upsets me, because I feel that as academics, it's really our job to be critical in our use of all our pedagogical skills. And I think that Turnitin has quite often, as I'm going to set out to show, been used in fairly problematic ways. So I hope that you won't feel offended. I'm hoping that if you recognize yourself in any of the things that I say this afternoon, that it will make sense to you, it will be useful, and you'll be able to use Turnitin in a productive, pedagogically sound way, and not in the very problematic way that many people are currently using them. So perhaps all I can say is, if you do feel at all offended, if it's any comfort, you're not alone. Some of the problematic ways that I'm going to be describing this afternoon are being used even at a department level. I've seen rules and guidelines, and even at an institutional level, I've seen examples of some of these very problematic misunderstandings of Turnitin and abuses of Turnitin. So you're not alone. That there's a real ignorance about and misapplication of text matching software such as Turnitin is prolific. And for reasons which will, I think, become clear as I go through and start talking a little bit. I won't talk too much, but when I speak a little bit about the litigation in this regard that's happened in the US, then you'll understand why this misapplication has become rife in Africa and in the Middle East. I've done quite a few institutional reviews in Bahrain and Oman, and I see the same kind of misunderstandings and misapplications there. And that is because these software giants are actually targeting us as markets now that the market perhaps has been saturated in the States or in Europe, or there is certain skepticism or more careful use of it in many of the big universities, big colleges in the States in particular. So I might be talking in a roundabout, abstract way. Let's get on with what the heck I'm talking about. The first thing I want to point out is that Turnitin and similar text matching software is big business. This is not just a small sideline, interesting little app that is used in our classes. This is a massive, massive business around the world. Turnitin's the most common one, but there are many, many others. And as you may know, last year Turnitin was sold for $1.75 billion. And yeah, you want to be a shareholder in text match or plagiarist or Turnitin in particular, or Google Checker. So the reason I want to point out that it is big money, I will come back to, because I think often when we see problematic behaviors in the academy, you can often follow the money and see where whose interests are being served in some of these problematic behaviors. Backing on, this is an extract from a policy from a university that will, or from a department that will remain nameless. But there are many similar ones. It says, the university supports and fosters a culture of zero tolerance towards plagiarism. Well, I'm going to argue in a moment that that, for a start, is very problematic. It then goes on to say, detection controls include the utilization of external examiners and software that detects the incidence of web-based material. That is correct, because the software does detect the incidence of web-based material. It does not detect plagiarism. I will explain in more detail in a moment, but there is no such thing as plagiarism software. Artificial intelligence is not quite that good yet. I'm sure it will be sooner or later. But at the moment, there's no such thing as plagiarism software, even though many of them call themselves that. There is only text matching software, as it says here, the incidence of web-based material. So the software will check any text against other text. It will check it and look for matching words. It can't look for plagiarism. It can only look for matching words. But the policy then goes on to say, all dissertations or thesis submitted for a Turnitin similarity report, which must be approved by the supervisor, must accompany examination. And I just want to say that that is a big mistake. They are saying that when the student submits a thesis to the examiner, it must include the Turnitin report. Hopefully, as I go on for the next 30 or 40 minutes, it will become clear why it is completely wrong to say that. But to put it very bluntly, a Turnitin report is longer than the document it is looking at. It has to be, because it adds comment to the document. So if your PhD is 300 pages, your Turnitin report will be about 350 or 400 pages. It can't be any shorter. So if you want people to submit a Turnitin report, they will submit their 300-page PhD and their 350-page Turnitin report. And now you might be saying, no, it isn't. I've seen a Turnitin report. It's one page. That page means nothing. It's just the cover sheet. I'll explain why. This is another example of, I'm sorry, my dog is going off in the background and annoying me, hopefully more than it's annoying you. This is another institution that says students will be required to submit a recent Turnitin report on the final version of their project report with their final submissions. Turnitin is an online system for detecting plagiarism. No, it's not. It's an online system for matching text. Students are required to address and moderate a high Turnitin similarity index before submitting the final report. What is a high Turnitin similarity index? They don't actually stipulate here, but I have seen a number of policies that do say 5%, 10%, 20%. And all of those are not only irrelevant, but actually dangerous. It goes on to say students must submit the Turnitin report showing the similarity index, not the digital receipt. The project report must also be accompanied by a signed statement acknowledging that the Turnitin report is for the same document as the one submitted in the project report. And my last example of such things is a PhD that I marked. I've blocked out the name. That's quite an old one. And here, just to give you an example of what was attached as an appendix with a PhD report. And this is why it is so problematic. In those two examples of extracts from different, one, the top in the blue square comes from a university policy, the orange square came from a department policy, and the green square on the right was an appendix on a PhD that I marked. The problem with this calling for a Turnitin report is what they are meaning is just this cover sheet. And the cover sheet means extremely little. It says here that there's an 18% similarity index. Now I'm going to ask you to just bear with me when I say that 5% may be hugely problematic. Total plagiarism, stolen someone else's ideas and not given due acknowledgement. 5% is unacceptable and the student should be thrown out. And 25% may be perfectly fine, not a problem, no plagiarism whatsoever. And I really want to, I can stretch that. 2% may be unacceptable. 0% may be appalling plagiarism, because Turnitin can only check for text matching. And that's one of the reasons why it very rarely catches English speakers. Because if you're writing in your mother tongue, you are able to paraphrase very easily, and the software is not going to catch you for using the ideas and palming them off as your own. So Turnitin, for a start, will far more likely catch second and third language speakers of English than first language speakers of English, because a first language speaker of English may have terrible plagiarism and the Turnitin will report 0%. On the other hand, you may get a 65% report, which is perhaps a very bad piece of writing, perhaps you are using a lot of formulaic language, or perhaps you are doing a lot of direct quoting. For example, in law by its very nature will have a higher similarity index. You are generally in law, in legal assignments and legal theses, you are generally quoting far larger chunks from cases, from case proceedings, and so Turnitin will match those. And law often uses a lot of formulaic phrases, often Latin, but not only Latin. And those formulaic phrases are very important legal terminology, but they're often ordinary English words as well, but they have a particular legal meaning. So in law, similarity index for a law assignment is going to be much higher than a similarity index for a chemistry assignment, for example. And it should be like that, because the software is looking for matched text. It is not looking for plagiarism. Plagiarism is the taking of someone else's words or ideas and palming them off as your own. Software is unable to find when someone has taken someone else's words or ideas. It can show you where there are some words that are the same as words that are found in some other text. That's all it can show you. And then you have to, as a human being, go through those and check whether or not that match is plagiarism. The percentage tells you nothing. So if we call for a percentage, if we tell our students, oh, you've got to put your assignment through the Turnitin and it must come to less than 5% and you must include that report with your assignment. If we call for some percentage, and it really doesn't matter if we say 5% or 10%, 3%. If we call for a percentage of any kind, we seem to be indicating that we think that a percentage on a Turnitin report equates to some degree of plagiarism. It doesn't. Now, you will remember that I said to you that Turnitin and other software packages are big, big money. Big, big money. And that's important, because if you have had this...
Okay, the internet connection is unstable.
Okay, let me try and mute all. Sorry. Battling with my settings today, sorry guys. If you indicate that you think that some percentage equals to a percentage, to an amount of plagiarism in any way, you seem to think that a percentage on that front page has some correlation to the percentage of plagiarism. The reason that you think that is because these big businesses have allowed you to think that. That is how they sell their package. That is how they get away with making huge sales around the world, because they manage to convince academics, they manage to convince universities to pay a fortune for their software with the promise that we'll help you get rid of plagiarism. Now, Turnitin itself actually very clearly says on its website that it does not identify plagiarism. It very clearly says that. It very clearly says that the percentage has no correlation to the amount of plagiarism. And it also very clearly says that you have to read the entire Turnitin report to make a human decision about whether or not the identified matched text constitutes plagiarism. The only thing is it doesn't tell you this in their brochure, and it doesn't tell you this on the front page of their website. You've got to click and click and click and get to the small fine print where they outline exactly what Turnitin does and doesn't do. And there you will find that they say that. And that's what they've been able to use in various court cases to say, but we're very clear that the percentage means nothing. We're very clear that matched text doesn't mean that there definitely is plagiarism. We're also very clear that a lot of plagiarism will not be caught by the software because it cannot pick up copied ideas. It can only pick up copied text. It hides that because it is not in the interests of the company to make it clear that that is true. If you call for a percentage on the Turnitin report and only look at the cover of the sheet and you don't go through the full analysis, then in all of those ways you'll be encouraging students to plagiarize. So it's not just innocuous. It's not just that that percentage means nothing. It's that by stipulating a percent, you are telling your students to plagiarize. I know it sounds like I'm really overdoing this, but I really want to make this point because it seems like I've said this so many times and people aren't getting it. So I'm really going to belabor the point. Setting a percentage encourages plagiarism. So how does it encourage plagiarism? Okay, well, hopefully I will make that evident. I'm going to make that evident by using Amanda as an example, and Amanda's here with us. And I'm going to ask her to speak to her research for a few moments at the end. I'm very grateful that she was able to join us. She managed to rearrange some meetings to be with us. So that's the cover of Amanda's PhD, and you'll notice that Amanda herself researched plagiarism. Her PhD topic is conceptualizations of and responses to plagiarism in the South African higher education system. So she herself put her PhD through Turnitin, and after excluding the direct quotes, and that's important because you know on the Turnitin system you can there's lots and lots of different settings, and you can make sure that it excludes all direct quotes. So anything in inverted commas, it will, as far as possible, it does make mistakes, but as far as possible, it will not look at anything that's in inverted commas and indented. And after she'd excluded all the direct quotes, and after she'd excluded all her references, which is another thing you can choose to do, you can click the box that tells Turnitin exclude direct quotes when you're looking for text matching and exclude the referencing, because of course, lots of people have referenced those same texts, those same articles, those same books, and so those words will be identical. So she clicked on the direct quotes, exclude direct quotes, she clicked on the exclude references, and after that, there's still a 7% similarity index on Turnitin. Now, in many ways, that's ironic. 7% is fine. She didn't have any plagiarism. I'd just like to point out that some universities who are saying things like, oh, after 5%, you know, there's a problem. Here's a classic example where really there was no plagiarism. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to think about. Oh, the one other thing she had to do, this is important, she had to exclude a particular source. So that's something else you can do, is you can choose to exclude a source, because Amanda published during her PhD. And although her publications, her journal articles and chapters would have had different forms, and you know, it's a standalone article, it's not going to, you can't just cut directly from a thesis, unfortunately. You have to craft a particular standalone article. But she used the exact same data. She had these amazing interviews with people, and she analyzed policies. So she was quoting from those policies and quoting from those interviews, and those are obviously verbatim in the article that she published and now in the thesis. So obviously one of the matches it said was, oh, you know, your PhD has got whatever percent, 8% match to an article by Amanda and Petlele. Well, yes, because it is the same person using the same data. So she had to exclude that source. Nonetheless, she still gets 7%. So I want to just have a look at that and why that 7% means nothing. And if you stopped there and you only looked at the cover sheet and you said 7% was a problem, then you are exacerbating a real issue. So let's have a quick look. Firstly, not one source. They're like, any of you have used Turnitin, you'll be familiar with this. I think it said something like 70 or 80 or 90 sources were found to be matched. In other words, bits of her PhD were found to match to about 80 or 90 other things out there, because Turnitin compares your submission against almost every database possible. And let's have a quick look at and not one of those had more than 1%. So some of them would be 0.8% similarity or 0.1% similarity. She had nothing that was more than 1%. I'd like to show you one of the ones that did have a 1% similarity, and it was found to be similar to another text in 6 different places. So here we go. So what you have on the left is what was her thesis, extract from her thesis, which Turnitin has found is copied from number 13, source number 13. And here we can see 3 of those 6 copies. On the left, we see that I can't believe that she's been so appallingly bad that she's copied the name of the center. And look there, the second example, she used the word conclusion. Awful. She also used this term, on preparing graduates for the world of work. And look on the right-hand side. Source number 13 also used that phrase, on preparing graduates for the world of work. Can you believe Amanda just ruthlessly stole that term and used it? And just to complete, because there were another 3 places in which she supposedly copied words from source 13. Here we go. Apparently she stole the words, the way in which knowledge is. The way in which knowledge is. She also stole this. Social and cultural practices, Gooding-Brown, 2036. If you have a look at how she used Gooding-Brown, 2000 calls for a disruption of such ideas through a critical dismantling of the concept of structures which inform social and cultural practices, Gooding-Brown, 2036, compared to number 13, to the desire and attempt to uncover the assumptions or rules which inform the firmament of social and cultural practices and which constitute the subjects within them, an entirely different text. And then finally, the final thing that Turnitin said that she copied from source number 13 are these words. It is important to note that. I think it's very evident, those of you who were in any way under the misapprehension, that a percentage automatically means plagiarism. This little example has hopefully disrupted that misunderstanding. I think it's really important for us to note that plagiarism occurs across a continuum. And on the one hand, on the left-hand side, we have hugely problematic plagiarism, and we need to grapple with it as a university. We cannot have academic integrity and build knowledge if we allow students to purchase their assignments from paper mills, to copy their friend's assignment, to cut and paste from the internet, to make up fictitious references. All of those things on the left-hand side are intentional. They need to be identified and they need to be punished. Unfortunately, there is far less emphasis or understanding about the mass, and I would argue it's far greater examples of plagiarism on the right-hand side. And that is where we have things like patchwork texts, where people are sort of pulling together little bits and pieces. They've forgotten to reference, they haven't referenced very well, they're just paraphrasing texts and knitting them together. They're doing what Angelil Carter calls trying on the voice. So they're starting to read in a discipline and they're sort of picking up the vibe, the style, the tone, and they're kind of trying to fake it till they make it. Or they've just got incorrect referencing. In fact, the early stages of learning to take on the voice of a discipline, according to Angelique Carter in her brilliant book, Stolen Language. Sorry, those of you, by the way, putting questions in the chat bar, I will come back to them at the end. So by all means, put things in the chat bar, but I'm just going to keep rolling on for now. Stolen Language, Angelique Carter, brilliant little book if you want to read more. So how is it that we are training students to plagiarize in this way? By setting these percentages and by telling them to insert just the cover sheet, which is entirely meaningless. Well, one of the things in which we are doing it is that we are teaching them to manipulate the text repeatedly until they trick the software. In fact, we even read that in examples of some of the advice to students is put it through Turnitin, check the percentage, find where the percentage is, and change some words around. So there isn't an understanding that that's just asking them to plagiarize better. Plagiarize by all means, but plagiarize better. Plagiarize in a way that the software doesn't get you. So use the software to see where you've plagiarized and then do it better so that it doesn't get noticed. It can get even worse. It can even lead, telling students that they've got to trick the software can even lead to really problematic examples, which is far more on that left-hand side of intentional plagiarism, which is where students just exclude sources. Remember I said on Turnitin you can exclude certain sources. Like, for example, if you put an earlier draft of your own article and you didn't exclude that as a sandbox text, your later version may compare it against your earlier version and say that you 80% copied your draft, your own draft. You would then tick the box to exclude that particular article. So a lot of students then realize all I need to do is tick on all those exclude, and then the front page will show a much lower percentage, and then I just have to hope that no academic reruns it through the software and doesn't exclude the things that I've plagiarized. So we're teaching them to cheat. We've also increasingly seen examples of students using text replacement software. You know, you can upload any assignment and it will find, like a thesaurus, it will find all sorts of, wherever it finds match text, it will change some of the wording for you. So there's now software to trick the software. And a lot of students in the old-fashioned academics who still mark hard copies, but who insist on a plagiarism, a Turnitin cover sheet, well, they just put in a few invisible letters. In other words, they put in a few letters in between that are colored in white, because then it's hard to explain. I should have shown it. But let's say in brackets there it says hard copy. If you put in between the words hard and copy, instead of a space, if you put a letter in white, you wouldn't see it when you read a hard copy, and the software thinks that it's a weird word called harder copy or something, or hardened copy, and it doesn't pick it up. So these are all the things that students learn how to do. Look, the latter ones are more manipulative and really perhaps malicious, but in a way we're telling them this is your job, trick the software. And certainly that top one, I've actually heard academics telling students, they wouldn't call it trick the software. They would say, oh, look, Turnitin will help you see where you need to change some words so that you can't be accused of plagiarism. So we need to really consider that using Turnitin in this way, in other words, using Turnitin to catch students rather than to help students learn how to write, also suggests that a limited amount of plagiarism is fine. If we're telling them 5% or 10% or whatever, we're telling them plagiarism is fine, but just not too much. Whereas surely that's not true at all. Surely no plagiarism is acceptable. And far more importantly, if we tell students that Turnitin will catch you for plagiarism and you can't have more than 5% or 7% or whatever, we are preventing them from doing the really hard and important work of understanding how we disseminate knowledge creation and how we build knowledge in the discipline. So we actually preventing them from having a learning experience. And as I said before, it privileges home language speakers of the medium of instruction. So quite frankly, I'm not likely to get caught for plagiarism by Turnitin, because I know how to manipulate the language. As I said, this is a bit of a personal crusade, and you'll see there that Amanda and I have published a couple of pieces in the conversation and elsewhere. We've also made a little video, I think it's about 7 minutes long, going through this in perhaps a lot less rambling way than I am doing now, but really because I see this as a growing problem in the way our universities are using it. And in case my argument to you from a perspective of academic integrity and being concerned about our students is not sufficient, perhaps I can convince you through the fact that there's been so many litigation cases in the States. Now, obviously, we know the United States, it is a litigious society. South Africa is less litigious, certainly in terms of our students, but you know, I don't think this is a good reason to behave in good ways. We should behave in good ways because we're academics and we want to make sure that our students get the best education possible. But it perhaps is a due warning that there have been so many cases, court cases against Turnitin and other plagiarism software, well, as they call themselves, plagiarism software, but what is correctly called text matching software. Most of the cases, such as the ones I'm showing you here, are about who owns the data. Turnitin has one of the biggest databases around the world because every student who ever submits an assignment, those assignments become part of its databases, and any next assignment will get checked against that one. So around the world, it's constantly building its own databases by using everything that people submit to the database. So it not only compares it against published articles and chapters and books and whatever, and websites, it also compares it against other people's assignments. So a lot of the court cases have been around copyright infringement, data ownership, and yeah, so saying that it itself is not following the norms of academic integrity because it is taking ownership of people's texts. But other court cases have been these kind of court cases, which is where students have been punished by either getting naught or being thrown out. In some cases, students have been chucked out of their universities, or they've had other kind of disciplinary actions against them, and it's been through a misuse, misunderstanding, or of Turnitin. So students have been found to plagiarize where they haven't plagiarized, where the university has set a percentage and then the student gets naught. And in America, where so much of data is in these big shared databases, the case at the back there, actually, the Rutgers student, she argues that she wasn't accepted into a postgrad course in another college because her records still showed that she'd had a disciplinary against her, even though she was then found that the disciplinary was through a misunderstanding of the Turnitin report. And so a lot of, I think maybe in the previous one, a lot of students now are refusing to submit their papers to Turnitin, or at least they use Turnitin themselves, and they will discuss the Turnitin report with their teacher or their professor or their supervisor, but they will not allow the university to see their Turnitin report. And those cases, most of them have won. And for that reason, a number of universities in the States have some of the news articles say they've banned Turnitin, but they haven't actually banned it, but they don't pay for Turnitin anymore, and they are very cautious about how it gets used because it has been misunderstood and used against students, punishing students in ways that are inappropriate. Here's Turnitin itself saying that it's not plagiarism software. Here's an example, just to give you an example of how Turnitin can be useful for teaching, helping students to write better. but not necessarily for identifying plagiarism. So this article on the left, this piece of students' work, was found to have the similarity of 85%, okay? Wow, warning bells if you thought that 85% meant anything in terms of correlation to plagiarism. But if we see on the right-hand side, the moment that we clicked on the exclude direct quotes, it went down to 2%. Now, from the perspective of you need to have a low percentage on Turnitin, you'd say, yay, exclude direct quotes, it's only 2%, this student's fine. But the student's not fine. This student doesn't know how to write. As you can see, all the things highlighted on the left are direct quotes. So when the software ignores the direct quotes, it's only 2%. But any academic who understands about knowledge dissemination, about voice, about building an argument through text would know that there's a problem with what's on the left. This is a typical undergraduate assignment where the student has read and they think that their job is to just summarize one text after another. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly normal step towards developing a voice within a particular discipline. It's not good writing, but it's on the way to good writing, and a conversation about why it's not good writing would be so helpful to the student so that they could see that they are not actually writing and telling the reader their views or building an argument based on their voice and drawing on the reading. Instead, they are allowing the readings to do all the talking for them. They are what I call handing over the microphone to all these different people. The first paragraph, they're handing over the microphone to Habib. The second paragraph, they're handing over the microphone to Bunting. The third paragraph is handing over the microphone to Kochlen. And the fourth paragraph is handing over the microphone to De Boer and Goedegeburen. Because in each case, they're cutting chunks of text from somewhere else. It's not plagiarism, it's bad writing. And Turnitin can help the student to start to understand why it is bad writing. So 5%, 10%, 25%, it doesn't matter because those are not particularly relevant. I think that the solution, I'm going to wrap up, I think that the solution really is that we need to talk about plagiarism as part of a much bigger and more important conversation. We mustn't think about plagiarism as something to do with referencing techniques. It's a skill. You need to use Chicago or APA, capital letter, brackets, place of publication, you know, all those techniques. And people often say, oh, they're going to a plagiarism workshop or a referencing workshop, and it's focused on which style and how to do it. Quite frankly, the software can do it for you. We've all got citation software. The citation software can teach you good referencing techniques. Referencing is not about a skill related to a technique. I think it's really important that we stop talking about plagiarism as a terrible sin for which you will be outcast for all time, and rather talk about plagiarism much later in a much more complex conversation about knowledge dissemination and academic writing. And then when we finally get to talk about plagiarism, talk about it in that continuum from highly problematic, lazy, manipulative stealing of other people's versus very common plagiarism by novice writers, and why it's unacceptable, but why it is a normal part of learning to write well and giving our students the tools to move beyond that early form of plagiarism. And so we need to have a conversation, and a larger conversation about academic integrity, about why do you want to make knowledge? Why do we want to write assignments? Why do we want to write articles? What is it that we're wanting to do? And we only then deal with plagiarism as one tiny part of a much bigger ongoing conversation about academic writing practices and about the very peculiar discipline-specific ways in which knowledge is made within our field. And I think this comes down to one of the problems where we often mistakenly tell students, or students mistakenly get the impression that we reference to avoid plagiarism. Of course we reference to avoid plagiarism. I'm not denying that. I just think that unfortunately that's what we tell students first and foremost. And really that's low down on the list. We reference because we want to make sure our readers take our claims seriously, and a reference to peer-reviewed prior research provides the evidence to do that. We reference to show our readers the breadcrumbs to be able to take back to where we got these ideas from, to connect to prior knowledge. We reference to position our contribution within a particular field of school of thought, a particular ideological position. Again, it depends on the discipline. In chemistry, I doubt that you need to reference to position yourself within an ideological position, but in cultural anthropology, you probably do. In physics, we probably don't reference to position your contribution within a school of thought, but in philosophy you probably do. And for that same reason, in physics and in chemistry, the references are in a section called the literature review. Whereas in cultural anthropology and philosophy, to carry on those examples, your references are in your introduction, in your methodology, in your theoretical framework, in your literature review, in your findings, in your discussion, in your conclusion. We reference all the way through those texts because the knowledge in those fields are far more open to debate, and we need to have evidence for our claims all the way through. We need to have references to substantiate our methodological choices all the way through. You don't need to do that in fields like chemistry and physics. So understanding that referencing is not a generic skill across disciplines, but rather takes a fundamentally different form because of the different nature of knowledge. This is why we reference, to position our contribution, to show which conversation we're joining, to demonstrate cumulative knowledge building, because we're not starting with a blank slate. We're building on the knowledge that came before us, and so on, and so on, and so on. And finally, we reference to avoid plagiarism. And unfortunately, we seem to spend a lot of time on that last bullet and hardly any time on the bullets before that. So I do think that that's where we need to expend our energy. And there's various ways of doing it. And I've had lots of talks about this, so I don't think I'm going to talk about it now. But if we expend our energy talking about reading and writing and how reading and writing and what it looks like in our particular field, making sure that reading is absolutely central to our curriculum, making it a reading intensive curriculum, making it a writing intensive curriculum, making sure that our students have access to reading in what Bernstein calls the field of production and not only the field of reproduction. I don't think this will be true at a traditional university, but I know those of you at the University of Technology, I've seen curricula where students can get through the whole 3-year diploma and only read texts in the field of reproduction. In other words, those are texts like course notes, lecture notes, textbooks. Textbooks are in the field of reproduction, because textbooks just tell you the sort of the knowledge of the field, and they don't demonstrate who said it, on what basis, how is that knowledge made. Whereas texts in the field of production, which are your peer-reviewed journal articles and peer-reviewed books, they more clearly explicate the norms and values of the field in the way that they write. So if students are not reading those kinds of texts at some stage, and then mediate that reading, have some forensic analysis. I ran a workshop on that a little while ago. Get your students to reading journals. There's videos on all these things. Make sure that they're writing all the time, lots and lots and lots of writing, and make sure that we give them regular feedback on their writing, focusing on those disciplinary norms of knowledge making, and not just focusing on spelling and grammar. Spelling and grammar are important, but they come last after the students have developed a coherent text that draws on the prior knowledge in ways that are expected. So we're not going to get it right, we're going to mess up, we're going to get it wrong, but we have to keep trying and we have to keep improving. And we have to at least understand that our current use of Turnitin in many departments is extremely problematic. So let's try and avoid that. Amanda, I am making you the co-host right now, and I'm stopping sharing so that you can share your screen. And then I'm going to unmute you, hopefully. So you should be able to share your screen, Amanda. And I'm battling to unmute you. Oh, there we go. Oh, and I just muted you. Sorry, Amanda. I unmuted you and then muted you again. Hang on. Sorry, guys. Very frustrating. Are you able to share your screen, Amanda?
Why does that have a
Okay, Amanda, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, I have. I have unmuted myself. I'm looking for share screen. I can't find it. It was here just now.
Oh, sure. It's at the bottom.
At the bottom, I'm there. I can see everything, but I can't see that menu.
Oh, shame. Okay, don't worry. I will open it. I think you did send it to me.
Yes, but there's a lot of clicking to do. You have to be patient.
That's okay. So while I am trying to share the screen with Amanda, if you can't share it on yours, then let me just introduce to you Dr. Mpahlela, who is at University of Johannesburg, and she did her PhD at Rhodes University looking at how plagiarism is dealt with across the entire higher education sector. So it was an enormous study. Okay, I'm now sharing the screen, so hopefully you can see it.
Yes, I can.
Great. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sue mentioned, this presentation that I'm going to make right now is based on my PhD study, where I reviewed plagiarism policies and related policies from the 25 South African public universities. Okay, one university was excluded due to it being new and not having relevant structures in place. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what institutions understand plagiarism in policy. And I'm thinking that, the way that they understand Turnitin is because of how plagiarism is understood. So they use Turnitin based on how they perceive plagiarism. So as Sue have already explained, they are using Turnitin in a wrong way. This is because perhaps most of these universities, they perceive plagiarism as an intentional act. So out of all the policies from 25 universities that were reviewed, it is very obvious that most of them see plagiarism as mostly intentional. Okay, so you can click. And they look at it, or they develop these policies based on the legal framework. Another click. So when you look in the way they define plagiarism, you see a lot of legal terms there. They regard it as an immoral and a dishonest act. So the common thread that runs through all the plagiarism definition is that plagiarism is a form of fraud which is committed intentionally, and they use words such as is to take, is to steal, is to pass off, is to appropriate or inappropriate. And these forms, they are actually terms that are used in criminal law. And they are framing plagiarism within the legal discourse or the legal framework. Okay. Yeah, so all these terms, they actually define plagiarism as a willful misconduct. So because it is willful, even the procedures that are being taken, they are such that they need to punish whoever is committing plagiarism. Even the structures that they are involved in managing plagiarism are from the legal discourse. For example, in some policies, when trying to investigate or to manage plagiarism. They said the South African police will be involved. They involve forensic investigators, the legal experts, and these bodies or these people, they don't only help the university to develop plagiarism policies, but in some cases, they are also training the students in plagiarism. So you can see that when a student is trained by legal experts, they can only do so from a legal perspective with little or no pedagogy at all. So it's kind of removing plagiarism from teaching and learning and making it a standalone legal act. So that is problematic. The other thing is that because they derive the meaning of plagiarism from a legal perspective, even the student himself or herself is viewed as a criminal. For instance, in some policies, they regard a plagiarizing student as plagiarists or as accused or offenders. These terms are those terms that are used in law or in Criminal Procedure Act, to be specific. Okay, and when students are given such type of identity, it often makes the task of educating them very difficult. In such cases, teachers are often find themselves as playing an adversarial role as a plagiarism police instead of a coaching role or as educators. And moreover, since this identity is linked to issues of morality, which are more related to the nature of an individual, it becomes even more difficult to correct such cases. Psychologists and criminologists, they actually acknowledge that what drives a person to a criminal behavior is very complex and it involves many complicated mechanisms, some of which are related to personal morality. Therefore, when a student is regarded as a criminal, combating a criminal behavior requires specialized form of intervention, which universities might not have the capacity to offer. So that is another challenge of how plagiarism is viewed by the universities. And because now they see plagiarism, I'm not done yet. Yes, thank you. Because now they see plagiarism as an intentional act. Even the way they manage it, even the way they intervene or the interventions that they make, they are punitive in nature. So in all the policies, they start from lenient to severe. For example, the lenient ones, it's like counseling, where student is counseled, or they give written warnings, they reduce marks and so forth. Then the severe ones start from expulsion to blacklisting. So you can see that this is aligned with the perception that they have as far as plagiarism is concerned, that it is intentional, therefore it should be punished, and in some cases, it should be punished severely. Okay, Sue already expanded more on Turnitin, but it is true, yes, even in policy, all the policies that I've reviewed and all the policies that mention text detection or plagiarism management software, they all use Turnitin. There's no university that is using any other software other than Turnitin. And all of them, they perceive Turnitin as a plagiarism detection software. And they use the similarity index score, as we have explained, to judge whether plagiarism happened or not, which is very wrong. Okay, though most of the universities see plagiarism as an intentional act, there were very few, 2 universities to be exact, and these 2 universities are the traditional universities, that they see plagiarism as something that is existing on a continuum. meaning that they acknowledge that plagiarism, okay, as much as it can be an intentional act, it is actually it can be an unintentional act because of some few reasons that I'm going to give. So these universities, they acknowledge that plagiarism is a violation of academic integrity. So they differ with the previous perception that I've explained of plagiarism being an intentional act in the sense that they are actually demarcating between plagiarism and other forms of academic integrity breaches. Whereas in most policies where they see plagiarism as intentional, there's no demarcation. They are also actually conflating plagiarism with other forms of academic integrity, such as bringing notes to the exam room, buying papers from a paper mill, and so forth. So those are kind of misconduct, but they are not plagiarism. But in policy, it's not very clear, because in some definitions, they are saying plagiarism is, and then they list all these other forms of misconduct, which are actually not plagiarism. But universities that understand that plagiarism is either intentional or unintentional, they were in their definitions, they are clear that plagiarism is a form of academic integrity or is a violation of academic integrity values. You may click. And these universities, when they approach plagiarism, they have a dual kind of approach. So they are very clear that where the existence of plagiarism is considered on a continuum, universities' policies often state the purpose of their plagiarism policy as being, number one, to develop, and as well as to develop, okay, for addressing unintentional practices, and to discipline for cases of intentional misconduct. Okay, the academic integrity scholars are actually saying that there's a need actually to view plagiarism as a in a holistic way, meaning that when you see plagiarism in that form, it becomes a possibility to develop even a more holistic approach to plagiarism, which kind of acknowledge the reality of plagiarism as being blatant, while at the same time considering the fact that not every student is a cheater. However, even when this is the case, okay, the case of these two universities in particular, one of them was very clear that the concept of academic integrity is actually very new in academia. So the newness of the concept in academia suggests that it is not yet fully understood, and that this might create a problematic connection between plagiarism and the value of academic integrity, and this can affect the integration of the culture of academic integrity within the institution. So this also it might be the reason why most universities find it very difficult to actually view plagiarism as in a continuum, as holistic as it should be. Therefore, they are likely to align themselves with the strategies of the more straightforward side of the continuum, which is that of intentional plagiarism. In conclusion, I would like to say, as much as plagiarism can be blatant, okay, can be an intentional fraudulent act, but because of other reasons, such as students being new into the university, being inexperienced, them not understanding the requirements of the academic discourse, it happens that they plagiarize unintentionally. So when interventions are developed, it should be bear in mind that not everyone, not all students plagiarize intentionally. That's briefly what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing some of those insights into how our universities in South Africa are tackling this issue. Thank you to everyone who was with us. If anyone would like to ask any questions, please do so. You're welcome to either put questions into the chat bar, or if you'd like to actually ask using the mic, just put the letter M, or either raise your hand and using that little hand raise issue, or put the letter M into the chat bar, and then I'll know that you want to ask a question. Or just put the question into the chat bar. I know it is gone 5, so some people had to leave at 5. So a big thank you to you all for being with us, and especially to Amanda. So lovely to connect again. But if you do want to hang around and ask any questions, then by all means do so. I'm going to pick up on a question that Nomzamo asked, which Mr. Kamalo, oh, it's nice to see your name there, which Mr. Kamalo already answered. But the issue I made about how Turnitin can help you to see how often you are relying on direct quotes, and that novice writers rely a lot on a lot of direct quotes, whereas the more experienced writer you are, the more you kind of hold the microphone yourself and you explain in your own words what you want to say. And you can still include references for all those reasons, not just to avoid plagiarism, but for all the reasons I gave, to support your perspective, to make sure your reader takes you seriously, to position what you are saying while you holding the microphone within a conversation that pre-exists you. For all those reasons, you would still have all the references, but you're writing in your own words. That, I think, is really what voice is about. I think we use that word voice in quite confusing ways. Voice doesn't necessarily mean I think or I believe or I'm arguing that. Voice is rather you standing with your hands on your hips and explaining to your reader, this is what is happening, this is what's important, this is what you should be concerned with, and including references to make those points stronger. And I think that Mr. Kamala's point is exactly right. It's something that comes with time. So yeah, I think we all slowly find our voice in our own way. Is it possible to use Turnitin without it building a history? Yes, it is, Bev asked. Yes, you can put a sandbox version so that it doesn't build a history. In other words, you're putting in a draft and you know you want to put in the next draft, and again, you don't want to compare with yourself. Yes, you can choose that option. There are YouTube videos on all of this stuff, so if you want to find out how to do it. What would be the most useful steps to take to counter the way universities look at plagiarism and Turnitin? I think just have lots and lots and lots of conversations about academic writing and about how we use texts to contribute to a conversation. So I think having that conversation in your discipline. One of the most productive activities, I think, is to sit with a group of students at postgraduate level with a shared reading and to actually unpick it. You know, do the highlighter, have 2 highlighters, one highlighter for all the claims the author makes and another highlighter for all the references, and to start to really unpick an article or 2 to see how are references used in the field. Why does this claim need a reference and that one doesn't? Why is this a direct quote here? Why did the author of this piece choose to use a direct quote and there they didn't? And as you start to cut apart some good articles in your field, you start to get a sense of how referencing is used in your field to communicate your particular field. Yeah, Melanie's asking me about online assessment. Sure, I'm almost nervous to go there. I think that we do need to think carefully about the way in which the current context has led to a lot more surveillance. I'm very worried that we might go the route that many universities in America have gone with Proctor software. I'm very opposed to Proctor. So if you don't know, a Proctor software is where your computer camera watches your students. So they might be doing an assessment at home, but you can watch them doing it through their camera, or through fingerprint, that they've got to give their fingerprint to access the test. So proctoring software is quite big in the States, but I think there are certain privacy issues. Amanda, is there anything else you want to add about, because the question about what should universities be doing, anything else that you would recommend?
The question again, Sue?
What do you think universities should do to better equip students to use Turnitin in sensible ways?
Okay, I think, Sue, first of all, students should be conscientized that they are knowledge producers.
Right.
That they have to, when they write their assignments, they are not writing to collect a degree or a diploma or any qualification, but they are co-producing knowledge in whatever field that they are doing, so that they become proud of what they have done at the end of the day. Because I know that students, when they get into the university, their objective is to get a degree. And because of that, they end up doing whatever it takes to collect that degree. But what they don't know is that they didn't come to collect, but they actually come in a university to develop something. So they start plagiarism. They should be told that it's them who are losing. Actually, it's not about being successful in cheating the assessor, but they are not gaining anything out of that.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. A very, very strong normative approach about sort of developing a pride. Actually, I think you used the word proud. Yeah, to sort of see that you are powerful as a student, that you can participate as a member of a discipline.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I think you're spot on. But so basically, if I'm understanding correctly, referencing then becomes something like, sorry, I'm thinking aloud. It's sort of really about student agency then, that referencing becomes part of what I do as a member, a very novice member, but a member of the field.
Yes, they should know that it's not about avoiding plagiarism, but about interacting with other researchers within that particular field. Yeah.
I think we don't do enough conversation with our students about that normative conversation. When we speak about referencing in terms of morality, we speak about it in terms of if you get caught plagiarizing, you're an evil person and you'll be thrown out. Whereas actually what we should be having is the morality of you are powerful, you are joining a knowledge field, you're learning about how knowledge is made, and you are going to be making sense of it for yourself and then writing about it and making sense of it for others, and hopefully becoming a knowledge producer. That is a powerful person in society. I see someone's got their hand up. That's Eva. Oh, no. Yes, Eva. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi. How are you?
I just wanted to go back to why we reference, why we cite, why we quote, and all that. And I think I come from a discipline which has it easier in a sense, because I come from philosophy. And when you make a claim in philosophy, you have to substantiate your claim. So what I'm doing is I'm teaching my students first to substantiate their claim on their own. Only later do they realize that they can also substantiate the claim by going to another person's work. And I think that helps a lot in developing the voice, because initially they don't go to a source. Initially, they just substantiate from what they know. And only later, as they go on with the discipline with us, do they learn that they can also reach to a primary or secondary source. Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So I think that's key. We need to have lots of conversations about knowledge making. And give our students the power to understand that they are knowledge makers. Develop that agency, as Amanda said. Okay, I think we are quite far over time. Thank you so much for keeping us company this afternoon, and I hope there was something of use in it. And yeah, hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much, Amanda, especially I know you had to sort your life out with us, but it was great. Thank you so much. Keep well, everyone, and don't forget to wash your hands.